The National Football League represents the apex of athletic prowess, yet for some of its brightest stars, the descent into darkness is a fall more precipitous and devastating than anyone could ever foresee. The grim roll call includes names like Kellen Winslow II, a man found legally culpable for monstrous acts of rape and indecent exposure, and extends to Henry Ruggs III, whose reckless decision to drive intoxicated extinguished an innocent life in a fiery wreck. The initial reports were stark and chilling. Henry Ruggs III, a rising star, was implicated in a fatal collision, with the overwhelming expectation that he would face charges for driving under the influence, a felony offense. The following are the stories of men who traded their helmets for prison cells, their legacies forever tarnished. We begin with the case of Chad Wheeler. Chad Wheeler, once an offensive tackle in the National Football League, built a career that took him from the celebrated fields of USC to the professional ranks with the New York Giants and the Seattle Seahawks. His life began on January 19, 1994, and from an early age, Wheeler was identified as a formidable talent, a blue-chip prospect who would eventually earn the prestigious honor of a first-team All-Pac-12 selection during his time at USC. Yet, his collegiate years were not without turmoil, a history plagued by numerous concussions, a debilitating ACL tear in 2014, and a litany of other physical ailments systematically eroded his value in the eyes of NFL scouts. Beyond the physical injuries, a disturbing episode in 2015 foreshadowed deeper issues when law enforcement was forced to intervene in an altercation, resorting to beanbag rounds to bring Wheeler under control before he was committed for a psychiatric assessment. In spite of these glaring red flags, the allure of his physical talent was enough for the NFL, and in 2017, he found his way into the league as an undrafted free agent. The New York Giants gave him his first professional contract, and through perseverance, he worked his way onto the field, ultimately securing a starting position at right tackle during the 2018 season. When injuries led to his release by the Giants in 2019, Wheeler found a new opportunity with the Seattle Seahawks, initially on their practice squad before being promoted to the main roster. He saw action sporadically throughout the 2020 season, but what no one knew was that his time in professional football would come to a violent and disgraceful conclusion in January of 2021. The date was January 23, 2021, in the city of Kent, Washington, when Chad Wheeler perpetrated a brutal assault against his girlfriend during a horrific episode of domestic violence. Official law enforcement records confirm the savage attack took place within the confines of Wheeler's own residence. His victim managed to flee to a locked bathroom, where she placed a desperate 911 call, her words to the dispatcher conveying the chilling certainty that she was facing her own death. When authorities arrived, they discovered Wheeler near the location of the assault, and disturbingly, their reports noted his demeanor as unnervingly placid and cooperative. Wheeler was taken into custody and faced a slate of 3 grave felony accusations: assault in the first degree stemming from domestic violence, the unlawful imprisonment of his victim, and resisting arrest. He was subsequently released after posting a $400,000 bond, but his professional career was terminated almost instantly when the Seattle Seahawks waived him from the team. Wheeler issued a public declaration of his intent to leave football and address his personal demons, but such statements held no sway over the inexorable march of the criminal justice system. On February 1st, 2021, he entered a plea of not guilty, initiating a prolonged and arduous legal fight that would not culminate in a trial until 2023. Finally, on November 9th, 2023, a jury in King County delivered its verdict, finding Chad Wheeler culpable for the crimes of domestic violence and assault. The judiciary determined that the attack resulted in significant physical injury, and the prosecution successfully contended that the brutal specifics of the crime warranted a felony conviction, leading to Wheeler's sentence of 6.5 years of incarceration. He is presently incarcerated and serving that term within the Washington State prison system. We now turn to another case, that of a player whose intoxication behind the wheel led to the most horrific outcome conceivable: Henry Ruggs III. This is the story of a former wide receiver for the National Football League, whose promising career with the Las Vegas Raiders lasted only 2 seasons before it was extinguished by a prison sentence. Born January 24, 1999, Ruggs spent his formative years in Montgomery, Alabama. In high school, his athletic gifts were undeniable. He was a coveted prospect who clocked a blistering 10.58 seconds in the 100-meter dash and attracted over 20 collegiate offers, a staggering achievement for someone with only 2 years of experience in high school football. He committed to the University of Alabama, where his electrifying speed and explosive playmaking ability established him as one of the nation's elite receivers, concluding his college tenure with 24 touchdown receptions, the third highest total in the storied history of the program. When Ruggs declared for the 2020 National Football League draft, he was considered among the premier wideouts in his class, a reputation he solidified by running a blazing 4.27-second 40-yard dash at the Combine. That elite speed convinced the Raiders to select him 12th overall, making him the very first receiver to come off the board that year. His inaugural season in the league revealed tantalizing glimpses of his immense potential, and by the midway point of the 2021 season, he had already amassed 469 receiving yards in just 7 contests. But that promising career came to a catastrophic halt on November 2nd, 2021 at approximately 3:39 a.m. In Spring Valley, Nevada, Ruggs was at the wheel of his Chevrolet Corvette, his girlfriend beside him in the passenger seat. Subsequent police investigations would confirm his speed just moments before the collision was an astonishing 156 miles per hour. A blood sample drawn 2 hours after the catastrophic event registered his blood alcohol content at 0.161%, more than double the legal threshold in Nevada. His vehicle violently struck the rear of a Toyota RAV4 operated by a 23-year-old woman named Tina Tinto. The force of the impact was so great that the SUV was instantly engulfed in fire. Tragically, Tina Tinto and her pet dog perished within the inferno. In a cruel twist of fate, Ruggs and his girlfriend sustained only injuries that were not considered life-threatening. Upon his discharge from medical care, Ruggs was processed and incarcerated at the Clark County Detention Center, where he was formally charged with driving under the influence, causing death, as well as reckless driving. The Las Vegas Raiders severed all ties with him that very same day. In the preliminary stages of the court proceedings, his defense attorneys mounted a challenge against the legality and admissibility of the blood alcohol test. The prosecution, fearing that a successful challenge to the blood evidence could lead to the complete dismissal of the primary felony DUI charge, actively pursued a plea agreement. Ultimately, Ruggs accepted responsibility by pleading guilty to 1 felony count of DUI, resulting in death, and a misdemeanor charge of vehicular manslaughter. On August 9, 2023, the court handed down a sentence of 3 to 10 years in a Nevada State Correctional Facility with parole eligibility slated for the year 2026. The final case we will examine involves a player whose legacy is defined not by his actions on the field, but by a pattern of criminal offenses committed against women. Kellen Winslow II. He is a disgraced former National Football League tight end, now confined to a prison cell. Born in San Diego, California, he carried the heavy burden and great privilege of being the son of Kellen Winslow, a celebrated Hall of Fame tight end. His collegiate career at the University of Miami was nothing short of spectacular. He achieved the distinction of being a unanimous All-American and was honored with the John Mackey Award, recognizing him as the most outstanding tight end in the entire nation. He made himself eligible for the 2004 National Football League draft, where his immense talent led the Cleveland Browns to select him with the 6th overall pick. Over the course of his professional career, Winslow played for several teams, including the Browns, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the New England Patriots, and the New York Jets, earning a single Pro Bowl selection in 2007. His professional football tenure was marred by a series of significant injuries, which included a fractured leg and a devastating ACL tear resulting from a motorcycle crash. Although his last official game was in 2013, he made brief, unsuccessful attempts to return to the sport in 2017 and 2018. In a darker turn, Winslow's descent into criminality began in 2014, when he faced his first charges for narcotics possession. The true gravity of his legal peril emerged in June of 2018, following his arrest in San Diego County for allegedly breaking into a mobile home park with the intent to commit burglary. Merely days later, he was apprehended again, this time on charges that encompassed the heinous crimes of kidnapping and assault. The prosecution laid out a disturbing pattern, accusing Winslow of preying on society's most vulnerable, specifically targeting women who were homeless or elderly. In a separate and deeply unsettling case, he was charged with the sexual assault of an unconscious 17-year-old girl back in 2003 when he was just 19. Winslow initially secured his release on bail, but his freedom was short-lived. He was remanded into custody after new charges were brought against him in 2000. His initial legal battle concluded in June of 2019 with guilty verdicts for mistreatment, indecent exposure, and the commission of a lewd act. A mistrial was declared on the remaining charges, but by November of 2019, Winslow had opted for a plea agreement. He admitted his guilt in the assault of an unconscious 17-year-old girl and the battery of a 54-year-old woman who was hitchhiking. This negotiated plea was a strategic move to sidestep a potential life sentence behind bars. In 2021, the final judgment was handed down. Winslow received a 14-year prison term for a litany of offenses, assault chief among them. His defense team argued that brain trauma and the possibility of CTE were mitigating factors, but this plea for leniency based on his football past failed to alter the judicial outcome. As of 2023, the man known as Kellen Winslow II is an inmate at the California Correctional Institution in Tehachapi, California, where he is currently fulfilling the terms of his sentence. The narrative of moral collapse deepens with our next subject, a former NFL player imprisoned for conspiring to murder a millionaire, Eric Naposki, whose career as a linebacker spanned both the NFL and the World League. Born in Tuckahoe, New York, he played his high school football across several institutions before his talent secured him a scholarship to the University of Connecticut. A conflict with the coaching staff led to his departure from the team, though he would eventually return to finish his academic degree. He broke into the National Football League as an undrafted free agent in 1988, with brief stints for the New England Patriots, Indianapolis Colts, New York Jets, and Dallas Cowboys. The bulk of his professional acclaim came from his time in the World League of American Football, where he spent 4 seasons with the Barcelona Dragons, contributing to their World Bowl victory in 1997. On the 15th of December, 1994, a man named Bill McLaughlin was brutally murdered within the confines of his gated Newport Beach estate. For 15 years, the heinous crime remained a cold case, a chilling mystery with no resolution. Then, in 2009, investigators tracked down and arrested Naposki in Connecticut, formally accusing him of the murder. The prosecution laid out a sinister plot, alleging that Naposki was the triggerman in a scheme orchestrated by McLaughlin's girlfriend, Nanette Johnston, who was secretly also Naposki's lover. The motive was cold, hard cash. Johnston was positioned to inherit over $2.5 million from McLaughlin's life insurance policies and savings, contingent upon his death. According to the prosecution's narrative, Johnston controlled McLaughlin's finances and lived in his opulent home, all while carrying on a clandestine affair with Naposki. The evidence placed Naposki working as a bouncer mere hundreds of yards from the murder location, granting him both the proximity and the opportunity to commit the crime. The case against him was constructed largely on circumstantial threads. The murder weapon was never recovered, and the scene offered no fingerprints, DNA, or eyewitness accounts. In July of 2011, a jury in Orange County found Naposki guilty of first-degree murder, with special circumstances cited for financial enrichment and the personal use of a firearm. He was eligible for the death penalty, but the state chose not to seek it. In August of 2012, he was sentenced to life in prison without any chance of parole. His co-conspirator, Johnston, was also convicted and handed an identical sentence. Throughout it all, Naposki has staunchly proclaimed his innocence. His appeals have centered on the argument that the 15-year gap before charges were filed unfairly deprived him of evidence that could have corroborated his alibi. In 2014, the appellate court rebuffed his appeal, concluding that no legal errors had occurred that would justify overturning his conviction. At present, Eric Naposki is an inmate at California State Prison, Corcoran, where he is serving a life sentence from which there is no escape. Moving on, we examine the case of an NFL player who masterminded a widespread fraud operation, Robert McCune. Robert McCune is a former linebacker for the NFL who is now paying his debt to society with a 5-year federal prison term for orchestrating an enormous healthcare fraud that implicated dozens of other former players. McCune, a native of Mobile, Alabama, was a dual-sport athlete in football and track at LaFleur High School. Following his high school years, he dedicated 3 years to the U.S. National Guard with deployments to Korea and Kuwait. He later took his talents to the college gridiron at Louisville, where he distinguished himself as a 2-year starting middle linebacker and received all-conference accolades. McCune's NFL journey began in 2005 after the Washington Redskins selected him in the 5th round of the draft. His rookie year was primarily spent on the practice squad, though he did see action in 5 regular season contests and 2 playoff games, contributing mostly on special teams. In the subsequent years, his career became nomadic, taking him to the Miami Dolphins, Baltimore Ravens, and Cleveland Browns, but he seldom saw significant playing time. When his prospects in the NFL dwindled, he extended his career north of the border in the Canadian Football League, playing for the Calgary Stampeders and the Toronto Argonauts. In Toronto, he rose to become a defensive captain, playing a key role in the team's capture of the 100th Grey Cup in 2012. Yet, McCune's descent into criminality began years after his football career concluded. Over a period spanning from June 2017 to April 2018, he executed a sweeping healthcare reimbursement fraud targeting the Gene Upshaw NFL Player Health Reimbursement Account Plan. This particular fund was established to cover the medical costs of retired NFL players and their families. McCune submitted an astonishing 68 fraudulent claims for costly medical equipment, including things like hyperbaric oxygen chambers, ultrasound machines, and electromagnetic therapy systems. Not a single piece of this equipment was ever actually obtained. He compounded his crime by filing claims on behalf of 51 other former players, the vast majority of whom never got or utilized any of the listed devices. The total sum Munn and his criminal associates aimed to siphon from the plan was a staggering $2.9 million. The criminal enterprise was ultimately dismantled by federal agents, and on December 12, 2019, Munn faced a slate of charges: wire fraud, healthcare fraud, and conspiracy. He initially postured innocence with a not guilty plea, a stance he would later abandon. By September 2021, he admitted his guilt on all counts, including the grave charge of aggravated identity theft. The consequences came in February 2022, when a judge handed down a sentence of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. While 13 other former players were ensnared in the legal fallout, investigators identified Munn as the central architect of the fraud, the one who orchestrated and filed the bulk of the bogus claims. Today, Robert Munn is behind bars, paying his debt to society in a federal correctional facility. Next, we turn to a story that descends from financial crime into the abyss of brutal violence, an NFL player who took his girlfriend's life in a horrifying manner. His name is Kevin Ware Jr., a man who once played tight end in the National Football League for both the Washington Redskins and the San Francisco 49ers. While never a superstar, he achieved what few can. He played on the professional gridiron, appearing in 16 NFL games, and for a short time, grasped the life so many dream of. Away from the stadium lights, however, his existence unraveled into a chaotic storm of violence, narcotics, and ultimately, murder. The tragedy was not without its omens. Ware's criminal record began long before he committed the ultimate sin. As far back as 2002, during his college football days at the University of Washington, he admitted guilt in a misdemeanor assault case. Once his brief NFL career concluded, his descent into lawlessness accelerated. The year 2010 saw him charged with theft and evading law enforcement following another assault. By 2018, he was sentenced to 2 years behind bars for possessing a controlled substance with intent to distribute. But it was 2021 when his life would irrevocably detonate. On April 19th of that year, police stopped Ware's vehicle in Magnolia, Texas. The search of his car revealed a disturbing cache: narcotics, a loaded AK-47, and a loaded 9mm pistol. For a convicted felon, possession of any firearm was a grave violation of the law. He was taken into custody and charged, yet managed to post bond just a day later. Not even a month would pass before his girlfriend, 29-year-old Taylor Pomaski, vanished without a trace. Witnesses, specifically neighbors, recounted a violent altercation during a party the couple had hosted on April 25th. That was the last night anyone saw Pomaski alive. Suspicion immediately fell upon Ware, a focus that intensified when he violated his bail conditions, leading to his rearrest that June. The search continued for months until a horrifying discovery was made on December 10th, 2021. Investigators unearthed human remains in the northern part of Harris County. The body had been severely burned, but DNA analysis left no doubt. The victim was Taylor Pomaski. In July of 2022, a grand jury indicted Ware for murder and for the heinous act of tampering with her corpse. It was then that prosecutors began to unveil the true, savage nature of her final moments. The evidence showed she had been viciously beaten with a blunt instrument before her body was set ablaze. Ware remained incarcerated on the prior drug and weapons charges as the murder case against him proceeded. Finally, in May of 2025, he confessed, pleading guilty to the murder of Pomaski. By doing so, he evaded a life sentence, accepting a 30-year term in a state penitentiary instead. Our next case examines a former player who chose a different path of criminality, one built on elaborate deception. The man in question is John Robert Leake, a one-time NFL linebacker whose career included brief stints with the Tennessee Titans, the Atlanta Falcons, and the Green Bay Packers. Raised in Plano, Texas, Leake honed his skills at Clemson University from 2000 to 2003 before entering the NFL as an undrafted free agent in 2004. He spent his professional years mostly on practice squads, seeing action in only a few games between 2005 and 2006. When his football journey concluded, Leake transitioned into the world of business, a move that would ultimately lead him down a path of financial deceit. For nearly 5 years, from June of 2015 to March of 2020, Leake orchestrated a sprawling Ponzi scheme, luring unsuspecting victims with the promise of astronomical returns. He spun elaborate tales of his involvement in lucrative enterprises, including luxury, real estate, profitable rental properties, and even international gold mining operations in Alaska and Ghana. It was all a complete fabrication. None of these ventures were real. Leake's method was to persuade his targets to loan him significant sums of capital, assuring them he would invest the funds and deliver exceptionally high rates of interest as repayment. The deception was total. He falsely claimed to have invested millions of his own money, projected a false image of success, and lied about possessing the necessary assets to secure their investments. To lend his scam an air of legitimacy, he went as far as issuing promissory notes to his investors, which contractually pledged to repay them at fixed interest rates. But once the money was in his hands, not a single dollar was invested. Instead, Leake funneled the funds directly into his own personal lifestyle, covering everything from credit card debt and rent to car payments and gambling habits. In a textbook Ponzi scheme maneuver, he used capital from new victims to make sham interest payments to earlier ones, thereby perpetuating the illusion of a profitable enterprise. All told, Leake swindled more than $8.1 million from 6 individuals. The actual losses exceeded $5.3 million, all stemming from phantom investments that were nothing but smoke and mirrors. His day of reckoning came in January of 2025, when a federal judge sentenced him to 30 months in prison and mandated he pay $5,314,000 and $50 in restitution. From financial ruin, we now turn to a case of personal violation, involving an NFL star whose crimes targeted vulnerable young women. The individual is Darren Malloy Sharper, a former NFL safety whose celebrated 14-season career saw him play for the Green Bay Packers, the Minnesota Vikings, and the New Orleans Saints. His on-field accolades are undeniable: a 5-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time first-team All-Pro. Sharper's name is etched in the record books, ranking 6th all-time in interceptions and tied for the most defensive touchdowns in the history of the league. Raised in Virginia, Sharper was a prodigy, excelling not only in football but also in his studies at Hermitage High School. His talent flourished at the college level with William and Mary, where he shattered school records with 24 career interceptions and more than 1,000 punt return yards. Selected in the second round of the 1997 NFL Draft by the Packers, Sharper quickly established himself as one of the premier defensive backs in the game, a career that reached its pinnacle with a Super Bowl 44 victory with the Saints in 2010. But behind this veneer of athletic greatness lurked a monstrous predator. Beginning in 2011, Sharper began a horrific pattern of assaulting women at parties, in nightclubs, and inside private homes. A spree that spanned California, Arizona, Louisiana, and Nevada. His method was insidious. He would use prescription sedatives, secretly mixed with alcohol, to render his victims helpless. A tactic designed to prevent them from identifying him and to complicate any future prosecution. Official investigations confirmed at least 9 victims fell prey to his scheme, though authorities believe the actual number could be as high as 16. Sharper did not act alone. His depraved crimes were coordinated with accomplices, Brandon Liciardi and Eric Nunez, who actively assisted in the assaults. Both men were ultimately convicted and handed down substantial prison sentences to be served concurrently with Sharper's. The law finally caught up with him in 2014. Sharper was arrested and confronted with a litany of charges across multiple states, including aggravated assault and conspiracy to distribute narcotics. He ultimately entered guilty or no contest pleas in courts across California, Arizona, Louisiana, and Nevada. Sharper was condemned to concurrent sentences amounting to 20 years in state prison and 18 years and 4 months in federal custody, in addition to 3 years of supervised release and a $20,000 fine. He is also compelled to register as an offender and submit to mandated treatment for his crimes, which utterly destroyed any possibility of a career after football. His fleeting time as an analyst for WWL-TV and the NFL Network was abruptly terminated by his arrest. Once hailed as one of the most formidable defensive players in NFL history, Sharper is now a convicted serial predator, imprisoned at FCI Elkton with a release anticipated in late 2028. Moving forward, we examine the case of an NFL player imprisoned for the murder of a 5-year-old child. Cierre Wood. Cierre Marcel Wood is a former NFL running back whose once bright football trajectory collapsed into a saga of tragedy and criminal conviction. A celebrated player at Notre Dame, Wood's time in the NFL was a transient journey with the Houston Texans, New England Patriots, Baltimore Ravens, Seattle Seahawks, and Buffalo Bills, which also extended into the Canadian Football League with the Hamilton Tiger Cats and Montreal Alouettes. Wood's upbringing in Oxnard, California, saw him flourish at Santa Clara High School, where he tore through defenses for over 2,600 yards and 34 touchdowns in his junior year alone. A USA Today All-American, Wood was among the most coveted recruits nationwide, ultimately committing to Notre Dame over several Pac-12 powerhouses. At Notre Dame, he seized the role of starting running back in 2011, accumulating over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns on the ground. But a darkness was emerging off the field, signaled by a 2-game suspension in 2012 for breaches of team conduct. After making himself eligible for the 2013 NFL Draft, Wood found himself undrafted, though he was eventually signed by the Houston Texans. His professional career was characterized by instability and brevity, marked by numerous dismissals and assignments to practice squads. Furthermore, his performance in the NFL and CFL never recaptured the brilliance of his earlier years, and his prospects were ultimately crushed by injuries, including a torn ACL while with the Bills. Wood's life then descended into an even deeper shadow in 2019. On April 10, 2019, he and his girlfriend, Amy Taylor, were arrested in Las Vegas for their connection to the death of Taylor's 5-year-old daughter. The investigation revealed the child had endured horrific bruising and trauma, reportedly from relentless physical abuse and being subjected to punishing exercise routines as a penalty for being overweight. The case sent shockwaves through the community, particularly because of Wood's former status as a professional athlete. In 2024, Wood submitted an Alford plea to second-degree murder and child mistreatment, receiving a sentence of life in prison with parole eligibility after 12 years and 4 months. In a different vein of criminal enterprise, the next NFL player on this list is serving a 41-year term for drug trafficking, Darryl Henley. Darryl Keith Henley was a star on the rise in the NFL, a cornerback for the Los Angeles Rams whose immense talent at UCLA had earned him consensus All-American honors in 1988. Chosen in the second round of the 1989 NFL Draft, Henley rapidly established himself as a cornerstone of the Rams' defense, appearing in 76 games and snagging 12 interceptions. But Henley's off-field transgressions would soon cast a permanent shadow over his athletic achievements, as by the early 1990s, he had become deeply enmeshed in a coast-to-coast drug trafficking syndicate. Using his Brea, California home as a base of operations, he exploited his celebrity to enlist accomplices, among them a former Rams cheerleader, to ferry suitcases of narcotics across the nation. His criminal life forced him to forfeit the final 11 games of the 1993 season, even as he continued to draw his $600,000 salary. Though he briefly rejoined the Rams in 1994 under strict court supervision, his contract ultimately lapsed. Where a multi-million-dollar NFL future should have been, there was instead a catastrophic legal implosion. In March of 1995, Henley and 4 co-conspirators, his uncle included, were convicted on charges of drug conspiracy and possession, a verdict that sealed his fall from NFL stardom to the status of a convicted felon. While awaiting his sentence in a Los Angeles jail, Henley's criminal audacity escalated to new depths. Authorities unearthed his conspiracy to murder the judge from his trial, Gary L. Taylor, and a key witness, a plot he orchestrated from his cell after bribing a jail guard for a smuggled cell phone. Henley's actions horrified the judicial system, painting the portrait of a man who had grown more menacing in confinement than he ever was on the outside. In consecutive federal hearings in March 1997, Henley was sentenced to 41 years and 3 months in prison to be carried out in maximum security institutions, a measure ensuring he would not see freedom until at least his mid-60s. Judge James Eidman branded Henley a hardened criminal who demanded 24-hour confinement. Assistant U.S. attorneys argued that the sentence, while severe, was wholly appropriate, considering the breathtaking scale and arrogance of his crimes. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments section, and before you depart, please remember to like this video and subscribe to NFL Rivals so you do not miss what comes next.